It's the Elephant in the Dome, the official podcast of the Washington State Senate Republican Caucus. Have you ever wondered why the deodorant you want is locked up like a bar of gold? Well, Washington currently ranks among the worst states in the nation for retail theft. And we're not just talking about petty shoplifting. It's actually kind of grown into organized crime at this point. Joining us are Jan Heimbaugh and Crystal Leatherman with the Washington Retail Association. Here's your host, Senator Chris Gildine.
Hey, well, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Good to have you on. You know, I think this is a really relevant topic for us to talk about today. I was at the grocery store a couple of weeks ago, and you know how they have those little turnbuckle styles that let you in, but you're not supposed to go out? So as I was going in, there happened to be some lady standing there with a handful of items, and as soon as the turnstile opened up, she just left. And I thought, did she pay for that? And I said, hey, did you pay for that? And she said, yes. I don't know what I would have done if she would have said no, like chase her down or something, probably not. But I think that I just witnessed retail theft with my own eyes, but that happens so often. How prevalent is this problem in our state?
Well, Chris, I think you're not alone. Or Senator, I should say, rather. Senator, you're not alone. I think a lot of us have witnessed that at the stores that we go to for the things that we need to live and stay clean and clothed. But it is very prevalent in Washington State, and it's organized retail crime that's the worst part of it. This is not just petty theft. This is not just a crime of need. It is that person probably took those items and sold them for $10 to $20, and that person then turns it over and sells it on some other platform or in person, and makes, depending on the price, about $200 to $300 or something, and then they turn it around and use it to buy fentanyl or guns or fund terrorism in some cases. So it's a very prevalent problem in Washington State, and retailers, that's why they have the gates on the way into the store and on the way out. And it's creating customer problems and customer friction, and it's a big problem.
If you want to determine how prevalent it is, I'd say just go into your local big box retailer in any city or county, and that'll tell you what kind of theft is occurring there. Because again, if you see those turnstiles, that's a theft deterrent that they've implemented that costs the retailer money to be able to try to help deter some of the crime. When you see products behind plexiglass, that is another indicator of what is a high theft item in that particular area. When you see stores starting to implement what they call a store within a store, so it's like maybe the cosmetic section at a certain. Oh
yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah, that is also a way for them to try to deter or minimize the amount of theft that they're experiencing. All of these methods, all of these theft deterrent devices and reformat of their store cost significant money. They're making the investment because the last thing they want to do is have to, close down operation, have to shrink their footprint in that particular, city or county. They're doing everything they can before they have to make that final decision.
Yeah, and it's costing a lot of money to do that, not just the items that are going missing, but all of the infrastructure and the added personnel cost. It's contributing to the cost of goods, isn't it?
Yes, and that absolutely does contribute to the cost of goods because, again, you are locking things, you're paying for the money to implement these tools, and then you are diverting staff resources and time to have to go be the person to go unlock the cabinets. If they're, losing product out the door, they have to reevaluate what the operations or like labor looks like for the day. This impacts everybody. It impacts the people who are buying the products on the shelves, and it affects the people who are stocking the product on the shelves.
There was a study in Forbes magazine and back in 2023, I think, that said Washington State was number one in the nation, the worst in retail theft. Like, how big? What's the scale of this problem?
Well, that study was actually the number one state for small businesses most impacted by retail theft. So that is, our organization, we represent retailers both big and small. We talk about big retailers implementing all of these theft deterrent tools and practices to help, try to reduce the theft that they're experiencing. The smaller grocery stores, smaller retailers, they don't have the kind of resources. If that money walks out the door,
Yeah, that's right. They can't hire the security guard to stand at the front door of all, you think of your little mom and pop independent retailer. Right. They can't afford that. They're already struggling to pay their workforce as is with our high labor costs as it is, right? And so they have, whether it's a security guard or plexiglass or, whatever, the gates, that's just not feasible for small retailers. But that Forbes study is very relevant, right? I think it adds about $350-ish to the price of goods for every Washington resident. So that's not just that's the cost. That retail theft is impacting the cost of goods because you have to mitigate those losses as a store. So it's adding $350, which if you want to put that in something that we actually care about, right? That's a year's subscription to Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu, right? Yeah. That's
for every individual person.
That's a week of groceries for a family of 4. Or that's gas at current very high Washington gas prices in my SUV to Chicago.
Wow!
Right? That's what it does.
And even on the front end of the products being stolen, and you see the cost of goods go up. On the back end, that's lost tax revenue.
That's right.
So Washingtonians are actually being impacted and harmed on both the front end and the back end of this crime.
It's a double hit. It's a double. So how do we get here? How do we end up being the worst state in the nation for this type of retail theft?
Well, one of the things is we are 51st out of 50 states and DC for police per capita.
Oh.
We have on average, I think they said just over 1 officer for every 1,000 residents. We've held this ranking for a number of years, which is very unfortunate. I know that there have been some attempts at trying to increase, the police force, but it is a very difficult state, I think, to be able to prosecute, to arrest and prosecute people for property crime, because I don't think property crime is being taken as seriously as it should be.
Right.
I've had people say, well, it's just property crime. Why would we need to lock people up behind this? And as Janet said earlier, retail theft, that's a gateway crime. Homeland Security has identified retail theft as a gateway crime, and it funds and fuels other forms of illicit activity, whether that is the fentanyl, fueling the fentanyl crisis, funding terrorism, funding human trafficking, funding other forms of illegal activity. It's harmful, and it's not taken very seriously here in our state, unfortunately.
And you mentioned earlier that it was a lot of organized crime. So is it like a small group of people who are responsible for a large bit? Is if we got rid of some of the top offenders, would we see it, or is it just really widespread?
I think it's very widespread. I think it just depends on sort of the region and the location. I think it starts small and can get very big, and it can come in and have just sort of a crime ring. We usually, when we talk about organized crime, we think it's like the mafia or the mob.
Yeah, right.
I think this is a lot seedier. Not that the mafia and the mob aren't seedy, I guess. I don't know, but this is, these are the things where you're walking into a house and there's just gallons and gallons of laundry detergent, automatic weapons, and humans that have been passed through that house. And that's what happens. So it is, I think, we've gotten here through, we haven't hired the public safety officers that we need. There's a lack of response when you call something in. They are stealing relatively small amounts of goods at one time. So it becomes sort of...
So it's like the misdemeanor level is over the felony?
Yeah, right. You're managing your amounts that you're stealing and how you're stealing so that you stay under a threshold.
So they know the law.
Oh, they know the law, right?
The law.
People change their behavior based on the law. I mean, right?
Sure.
It's just how it works, or based on outside factors. So it's sort of the threshold of what they're stealing each time they're stealing and how often they're doing that, and if they're linked or not. And it's hard to link between stores. So there's some sort of laws that allow us to go after them outside of, for a felony if they've done it a certain time of over a certain amount, except that it's very difficult to link.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to link the person who stole over here at this retailer to the same person who stole that 4 gallons of laundry detergent over here.
Yeah. And because we don't have enough law enforcement officers, maybe they don't have the capacity to do the
and then they're not going to get and then you're not going to get prosecuted. So like why? Right? Why respond? So there's a whole bunch of
that brings up a whole other point, which involves defenders, public defenders. Because the Washington State Supreme Court recently came down with a ruling that reduced the number of hours each defender can work per year. And we already have a shortage of public defenders. People are required to have a speedy trial. So if they can't get a speedy trial, nothing happens and it goes unpunished.
You are absolutely right. Mm-hmm. That case that requires public defenders to only have so many clients or so many hours or whatever it is has reduced. It is going to pile on or coral reef the problem that we have with organized retail crime and big products and small products walking out of our shop stores without payment. It is a significant problem. We were already overburdened in the court system. When it comes to prosecuting crimes of all types, mm-hmm. this will only make it worse, and the crimes that will get less attention are these ones where, they'd rather focus on murder, which, right, in theory makes sense, except these are also gateway crimes that lead to bigger and worse things. I think the other thing that is contributing to this is our drug crisis, right? Mm-hmm. These are funding drug rings and drug crimes, and mm-hmm. we are having people who are going in to steal the stuff who are also potentially users, and our sort of lack of enforcement on mm-hmm. Drug use has significantly impacted not just organized retail crime or theft, but also sort of the spaces that mm-hmm. people are shopping in. So mm-hmm. it is uncomfortable for customers to be in those spaces because it's uncomfortable because it feels unsafe. It means customers are bringing in their laptops and their briefcases into stores because they can't leave them in the parking lot as well, right? So there's a whole series of things that make life more difficult for not only the store but also the customer, and raise prices and make things unpleasant for all of us. Mm-hmm. And there's stuff we can do about it.
One of the other things that also contributes to, in the same way that there's the reduction in hours for public defenders, there's also a lot of the counties and cities do not have the resources available to be able to fund prosecutors. Again, so they have to triage their cases according to what is available to them. Mm-hmm. But to Jan's point that generally if people are participating in this criminal activity, not always, but it's not uncommon that when we've in the news, and there are a number of articles out there, you can look back and just type in organized retail crime ring bust Washington State and see what comes up. They're very likely those who have been busted are linked to other serious crimes. So like just a couple to list off. There was an individual in Thurston County who was arrested. He had nearly 100 arrests.
100 arrests.
They got him on a high-speed chase. He had 100 arrests. He has, I believe it was a significant number of misdemeanors and 4 felonies. And they caught him on a high-speed chase in Thurston County.
Wow.
100 arrests, almost 100 arrests. And then there was a Renton woman who led this very prolific crime ring where she stole a lot of luxury and higher-end goods. She was responsible for at least $600,000 worth of stolen leggings. Just leggings.
Oh, my goodness.
And the thing that is very concerning about her, she had employed and recruited her 11-year-old niece into these crimes. And when they busted her finally at her home, she was in possession of a firearm that she's a felon. Her and her mother, both felons, in possession of firearms, and they linked the getaway vehicle that she often used for these retail theft cases to a murder.
Oh my goodness!
So not necessarily. I don't know if she was found, but like the fact that she is tied there. I literally could go on and on.
Well, but you bring up another point that we should probably talk about is some of the demographics of the people who are out there doing retail theft. And the legislature in recent years has come down with reduced penalties on minors. And one of the things that we were always saying is that if you do this, these bad actors, these bad elements, they are going to recruit youth because they get less penalty, and they're going to be using them, recruiting them into the criminal world. Are we seeing that very much?
Yes, absolutely. And right, criminals prey on the weak and the needy. This is not news. This is not just unique to organized retail crime. It's not unique to any particular type of crime. But criminals prey on the weak and look for the people who are the most vulnerable. And kids, particularly kids who potentially aren't coming from the best home life or have a connection or have gotten in with the wrong crowd, as the old people say, those are ideal targets for them to send them in to go do the sort of what we refer to as being the booster. And it's absolutely because we know that they have shifted their behavior based on the misdemeanor threshold. So why wouldn't they shift their behavior based on age thresholds? And it's really tragic because what happens to these kids is they just end up not actually being corrected for their, misdeeds of their youth, as it were, because we're just letting them go, or we're not actually prosecuting and holding them accountable in a place that's safe for them to actually rehabilitate and actually be able to make something of their life in the future.
It's like a self-perpetuating cycle.
Yes, absolutely. And it's awful.
And they're probably going to graduate from stealing the laundry detergent that you were talking about to stealing other things, and then just go on to more and more higher and higher degrees of crime.
There's one thing I want to talk about too. We were talking about organized retail crime. I would say that there's two very serious forms of crime that are occurring in Washington State when it comes to retail theft. There is retail theft with repeat offenders, and this is where you see like maybe 15 to 20% of about 80% of the crime is committed by like a very small fraction, 18 to 20% of individuals. And those are people, it's like disorganized crime, but they will go in, they'll clear a shelf, they'll do like a push cart theft where they'll load up a cart and then just go out the door.
Just right out the door.
And then you have the organized retail crime where like it's very organized, very structured. You have your boosters. You have these rings.
They probably have a little shopping list.
They do have shopping lists. Absolutely. They'll get and they'll tell them what your value is. If you steal this is what you get per product. And what happens is then they will go take it to a fencing operation. And a lot of time there are fencing operations where they present as like a pawn shop. Or, it's a storefront. It's a brick and mortar storefront that you can see around the state. They will go in, bring in the goods. But you can't go in and purchase anything because that's not what it's intended for. So both crimes are very severe and impacting Washington in different ways, which has led to, I think, there was a report that came out that it was about $3 billion worth of stolen goods in 2021.
Wow.
$3 billion worth of stolen goods. We had a discussion on this. That is larger. That is a larger amount than our largest crop. We produce the largest crop of apples, which is just under $2 billion worth. Retail theft and organized retail crime is greater than our greatest crop out of our state.
Wow, that's
incredible. We have more
retail
crime in Washington than we produce in apples.
More crime than apples.
Yeah.
My goodness gracious. So what do we do? What do we need to do from here as the legislature? We talked about a couple of things. We talked about the prosecutors. Perhaps the legislature ought to look at funding more defenders, so that public defenders, so that people can get their trials. Maybe we need more law enforcement officers. Maybe we need to relook some of the misdemeanor crimes or the juvenile crimes. Or what are some of the things we should do?
Well, first, I'd like to just start off with. We ended last session. There was a $500,000 allocated in the budget for continuation of this organized retail theft prevention pilot program, which was funded 2 years prior. That program has proved very successful by recommending diversion programs and also aggregating and recommending specific cases, severe cases for prosecution. They saw a large number of reduction in theft. But at the end of this last session, with that $500,000 line item, that was one of the few items that Governor Ferguson vetoed.
He vetoed it.
He vetoed it.
$500,000 was just a bridge too far for the budget.
Wow.
Yes,
broke the camel's back.
We did the math. Like if you were to estimate about how much that $500,000 would have cost in comparison to the entire budget that had passed, it equates to about 7 minutes worth of spending total.
Wow. Yeah, for perspective, I mean, the budget is over $70 billion.
Yeah.
So you're talking $500 million is...
Yes. No, 500,000.
I'm sorry, 500,000.
500,000.
Yes.
7 minutes of
500,000.
government spending. That was
Wow.
that was the thing that we were going to save money on. I think to your question, I think it's a yes and question, right? So
okay.
we need more prosecutors, we need more public defenders because everyone should, have a fair trial and have a robust defense. We need more police officers. We also need sort of enforcement on drug use and drug
Yes.
crime. And we also need to reform sort of our youth accountability laws and make sure that we can actually keep youth and divert them or hold them accountable so that they don't actually go into a life of crime, into adulthood, and can become a functioning member of society that is, providing for themselves and their families as well as just, functioning in the world. So there's a whole bunch of different things that we could do that we've chosen to sort of sit back on our hands around the criminal justice system.
We being the majority in the legislature.
The state, I guess, the state,
okay.
not us here. But I think there is just there is not really a silver bullet, if you can, say that it's a bunch of different things that have led us to this spot. But, the organized retail crime right now is leading to stores closing and creating food deserts for the communities that need, every community needs
the
food,
healthy food, right?
but need healthy food, right? So we talk about nutrition but then that also creates a life of those people aren't getting the food that they need. So how are they living there and operating their lives? And that also leads to other crime,
Right.
Because when you're hungry, you're hungry. And so it's sort of this, like, all of these things are a problem.
Cycle.
It's a vicious cycle. I don't think sort of government-owned grocery stores is the solution here, right? The thing is, we need to punish people to scale of the crimes that they are doing and actually work with our business community to figure out things that actually help people stop stealing stuff, whether it's for organized retail crime or just retail crime and retail theft, and hold them accountable so that they can get their life back on track.
Yeah. And we need to get people into treatment if they're on drugs.
That's right.
Because like you were talking about, so many people are out feeding their drug habit with a life of crime, doing all of the theft, and the real problem that they're facing is they're under drug addiction, and we're giving them no help in this state.
This is the other thing too. When we, Jan says that there's a number of solutions, and again, having things according to scale, diversion for those who are like early offenders, especially youth. Starting those programs and actually holding them accountable to see the diversion all the way through, because right. I've heard from loss prevention professionals, I've heard from prosecutors, there are people who will start a diversion program, but because there are no accountability measures in place in this program, they can elect to do diversion instead of jail time and then never actually complete the program, and then they're out stealing again. Or there was one case where an individual stole. It was like $22,000 worth of goods from a really well-known makeup retailer. As soon as they got out of jail, that very day, they immediately hit that store again, hit that same retail brand in a different county.
So just no fear, no consequences, just leads to repeat bad behavior.
This is one of the things that we've echoed for a number of years. You can have compassion for those individuals who are suffering from drug addiction and who need help and services, but you also must hold people accountable for their actions. Again, according to scale. Compassion without accountability is complicity. And that's what it is.
Oh, wow. I like that.
Yep.
Compassion without accountability is complicity. Very well said.
Our thanks to Jan Heimbaugh and Crystal Leatherman with the Washington Retail Association. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode of The Elephant in the Dome with Senator Chris Gildon. It's the official podcast of the Washington State Senate Republican Caucus.